You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 5th of May 2026 on Monocle Radio.
How much longer can Asian energy reserves outlast the war, which may or may not be happening in the Strait of Hormuz? Do we entirely yet understand what drones are doing and are going to do to warfare? And is there a case for issuing credit cards to children? I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Somnath, Batabyal and Isabel Hilton will discuss the day's big stories, and we'll hear from designers working to adjust to the climate crisis. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and I am joined today by Isabel Hilton, founder of China Dialogue and visiting professor at King's College London, and by Somnath Batabyal, lecturer in media in development and international journalism at SOAS. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Somnath, first of all, you have recently been in Antigua, where cricket-related things occurred. Please be quick, as we're already losing Isabel.
I faced some very quick bowling. I've turned up at the nets. My son was playing cricket there. I turned up at the nets and found a man called Alzari Joseph, who had the best debut in the IPL. Sorry, Isabel. And I faced him. He bowled a few 90 miles per hour, and it's terrifying.
I would think. I mean, the IPL, with all due respect to him, is obviously not actually cricket.
But he has been playing West Indies too.
Well, proper cricket.
Yes.
But nonetheless, 90 miles an hour must be quite something to see from the receiving end, although the follow-up question, did you in fact see any of it?
I wafted my bat around, but I didn't touch it.
Yeah, that's I've done much the same at much slower bowling myself. That is quite something, though. But that aside, would you recommend Antigua as a place to visit?
Oh, my God, yes. 100,000 people, one country, 365 beaches, and very good food and lovely, lovely folks. Yes.
Okay, well, a big hello to all our many listeners in Antigua. Isabel, by way of seamless pivot, you are not going to Antigua, but you are going to several of the countries in the world which are not, in fact, Antigua.
Well, yes, indeed.
So you can't just write this stuff.
Yes, I'm. Upcoming trips to the United States, to New York in particular, and then other bits of the East Coast, and then to China. So I'm covering the geopolitical rivalries all in 1 month.
In New York, you will be, as I understand it, bunging some sort of gong to someone who has been on this programme talking about the book for which he is being embaubled.
Which speaks well for both of you, if I may say. Yes, it's the Asia Society New York's Non-Fiction Prize, and it's going to Barbara Demick for a rather wonderful book about Chinese twins who were separated because of the cruelties and vagaries and corruption of the one-child policy. She covered it when she was a correspondent in China, and the story came to find her again many, many years later. I warmly recommend the book.
As do I. It is a terrific book, and I warmly recommend the interview we did with her, which listeners can doubtless find on our website somewhere. We will begin tonight in the Strait of Hormuz, where despite a certain amount of argy-bargy since yesterday's launch by the United States of Project Freedom, we are encouraged to believe by US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth that the ceasefire is not over. This is an assessment of events which may presently be arching eyebrows in the United Arab Emirates, the defense ministry of which yesterday counted 15 incoming Iranian missiles and 4 drones, with further attacks reported today. A large fire is reported at the Fujairah oil refinery. 2 US commercial ships have, however, managed to transit the strait. Somnath, do we have any idea what is actually going on here as such?
One thing I can say for sure is that Asia is feeling the supply shock.
It will
terribly.
Be.
And let's break it down into a few countries instead of saying Asia. India, most of the elections are over. Prices will now shoot up. Right? Sri Lanka, we know what happened a few years back when there was oil scarcity. Pakistan doesn't have cash reserves as much as perhaps India might have. Bangladesh, new government. their honeymoon period is very short. Things can go wrong very quickly. So there is this kind of, it's like a powder keg, and something might just erupt suddenly and we won't be able to control it. So in one sense, Europe is feeling the price shock while the supply shock is in India.
There's a couple of things that I do want to pick up on, but Isabel, first of all, China, as we have discussed before, has seen this and other things coming and does have substantial reserves. It is never, but they won't last forever. No. China is the world's biggest oil importer. How far off is some sort of fairly brisk reckoning for China if this keeps up?
Well, we're still a couple of months away. I mean, they did have reserves, and actually they haven't been drawing them down too much because, when this all began, there were a lot of ships on the water, as they say. So a lot of countries haven't felt the shock because those ships have turned up and delivered their cargo. So the interruption, there's a kind of, slow motion effect on the interruption in supply, which will now begin to hit. So we're about to see the shock to China, but I think to other more vulnerable countries with needs and smaller reserves. China has options. It has supply. It has pipeline supplies from Russia and from Central Asia, and it has LNG coming down from the Arctic. China has been looking at avoiding choke points because it has a good sense of geography and is dependent. But also it has the largest installed capacity for renewable energy. So there are in lots of ways China is, hedged. But you're right. I mean, nobody is going to be immune to this in the long run. And maybe one of the ways that China is going to hurt is the hit to the global economy because China depends on exports. And, that's bad for business.
Somnath, I want to come back to a point you were making about the possibility of some sort of eruption. Asia takes 85% of the Gulf crude which transits via the Strait of Hormuz. In some of those countries, 3 alone that you mentioned, Sri Lanka, India, Bangladesh, we are talking about hundreds of millions of people who do not have substantial savings or indeed any, countless millions of businesses which operate from one day to the next and are obviously reliant on energy supplies keeping coming. How rickety could this get again if this drags on for weeks or months to come?
Few examples, an ancient town called Firozabad, where glass is manufactured, right? And this has been for centuries. Suddenly, because of this crisis, shops, manufacturing has shut down. At home, my mother says LPG gas prices have doubled. Right.
And that's going to put a big dent in a lot of people.
And this is at the point where the government is still subsidizing. Now that the main elections in India, the by-elections are over, the subsidies will stop. And this is an India which is perhaps more economically resilient than, say, Pakistan or Bangladesh. Bangladesh, there's a serious crisis brewing because it's a fairly new government. Has very little room for maneuver. The opposition party, Awami League, has been banned. The situations are kind of quite dicey. Sri Lanka, again, the recent history has been very unkind to Sri Lanka. So, again, there's oil crisis there, might have another a problem coming in. So they're just flashpoints. You don't know what will exactly happen. One thing goes wrong and it just might erupt.
I mean, if some sort of crunch does come, Isabel, are the people in those countries and the governments of those countries likelier to blame the United States or Iran?
Well, when these crises happen, people tend to blame their own government first, and then.
But those governments will attempt to pass the blame.
They will, of course,
up the hill, and not unfairly.
And I think most of them would point to the United States. After all, Iran is Iran and has been, much the same country for 20 years, 30 years. What the rogue factor here is the behaviour of the US administration. First in cancelling, a nuclear deal which was negotiated, which did have some safeguards built in, and then in absolutely bungling the conduct of the kinetic phase. And now bungling the negotiated phase. So I think certainly if you were to ask Pakistan on the quiet, they would roll their eyes and say, we're doing our best, but, Washington's impossible. And most of the Gulf states, I would think, are going to be looking pretty sideways at the United States because they're really hurting.
Just finally on this one, Somnath, back to the conflict itself. Have we reached that point that we occasionally do in conflict where the reason for the war to continue becomes not so much the reason the war started as a desperate attempt to make it look like starting it wasn't a terrible idea in the first place?
You know, I'm finding this very strange that even today when Pete Hegseth was speaking, he's talking about the accord still holds, while the Iranian negotiator is saying we haven't started yet. And I'm suddenly finding this change of rhetoric. A month ago you were blowing a country back to 6,000 years, blowing it away, and now suddenly Washington, at least the last couple of weeks, seems to be wanting to calm it down. Well, Iran is happy to keep going on.
Well, indeed so. And in related developments, the United States is not presently alone in learning all over again two time-worn truisms of military endeavour. One, that it is a stretch easier to start wars than stop them. Two, that militaries tend to find themselves trying to fight the previous war. On the latter count especially, some are adapting better than others to a modern battle space increasingly dominated by drones on sea and land as well as in the air. While Ukraine, for example, has adapted with alacrity, Russia remains heavily reliant on tactics that brighter commanders were starting to wonder about circa the Battle of Tannenberg. Israel, which has previously leveraged modern tech to strike blows against Hezbollah via exploding pagers, now finds itself somewhat beset by Hezbollah's own fibre-optic drones, which emit no electronic signature and cannot therefore be traced or jammed. Isabel, I realise that this is a bit of a how long is a piece of string question, or perhaps a how long is a piece of fibre-optic cable question, but how big an upheaval in warfare are we presently witnessing?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, if you look at the munitions that the United States has blown, the United States and its allies, and the cost of those, you're looking at a replacement timetable of 5 years, even if you double production. If you can get hold of the rather sensitive materials that China now monopolizes, and China introduced export restrictions a year ago on dual use for rare earths and critical minerals. So how that's going to play out is a bit of a mystery. But also they were firing Patriot missiles. They were using Patriot missiles, several million each, against, again, drones, few 10,000, if that's the most expensive end. So you've got a battlefield which is proving, you have an asymmetric warfare, not only in terms of personnel and resources, but in terms of technology. And it's very, very interesting. The Chinese are watching it extraordinarily closely because they have a privileged vantage point. They have a privileged vantage point in Ukraine because they supply drones to both sides and are able to monitor performance and get all the feedback they need. And pretty much the same in Iran. So although this is a kind of second-hand experience, it is a very steep learning about modern battlefields, which I'm not sure that the US is taking on board with quite the same attention.
Is it going to be difficult, Somnath, for those very equipment and manpower heavy militaries in across Asia, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, to adapt to this? Because these are militaries which have historically committed to, well, I guess the somewhat Russian idea of mass.
Yeah. This is completely a new game, as you were saying, Isabel. $1,000 drone can suddenly do damage, and it's a draining of continuous resources.
Yeah, even if the $1,000 drone doesn't hit its target, you have to fire $1 million missile at it.
Exactly, to intercept it.
You're still in front.
And this is what Iran is at the moment doing, that it can run a low-cost, cheap war while knowing that America can't withstand that pain. I mean, India, Pakistan will be also like China, looking very closely at what's going on. But, I was thinking of epics and stories and wars, and we have heard this so many times, big armies being felled by very small incidents, by very agile, mobile armies. One example was in India when Alexander comes down. Porus, the huge emperor, is felled because he comes with elephants, they come with horses. The great Akbar is felled by Shivaji because Shivaji moves on feet, right? So warfare stain. I mean, this is whatever else this moment will bring, and there'll be many impacts, modern warfare was definitely going to change. And big countries like China and America will have to rethink how and where they spend their money.
Is that rethinking, Isabel, and this is where we ask you to explain what on earth is going on within Chinese High Command, which, I mean, is kind of fun for everybody because your guess is at least as good as anybody else's because nobody knows, really. But there has been this ongoing purging of Chinese military high command. Several distinguished-looking careers have ended rather abruptly. Is that related to this or to something else, as far as anybody knows?
It predates this, and I mean the last rather surprising purge was the Central Military Commission, which now essentially consists of Xi Jinping and a friend recently appointed, and all the experienced high command have gone. This appears really to be about Xi Jinping's need for absolute loyalty and possibly about corruption. And I have to say, in some respects, something rather similar has been going on in the United States, where 50 generals have been sacked by Pete Hegseth. Many of those were sacked because they were women or not white.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't clearly the Chinese problem. But the need for absolute loyalty and the loss of experience, they are kind of common factors. And that is about, I think, authoritarianism and notions of supreme leadership over competence. So I think there is a curious echo going on between Washington and China on that. But I think that in terms of, structural issues and the shift in attention or the shift in methodology of the modern battlefield, it's not quite that in China.
Somnath, Isabel correctly notes that there does appear to be a parallel process occurring in the United States. And yes, of the generals that Pete Hegseth has sacked, 60% of them were black or female. And also Army Chief of Staff General Randy George appears to have been binned for refusing to strike 2 black men and 2 women from a list of imminent promotions. Is there any imaginable explanation for this other than what appears the obvious?
Well, there's no clear performance-based explanations have been given. It definitely appears ideological. I mean, as you said, 20 generals.
Ideological's charitable, but do go on.
I mean, ideological from that point of view. But 20 generals since 2025, that's a huge number, right? The U.S. Army Chief of Staff, Air Force Vice Chief, the Navy's top officer, and Pete Hegseth being the man. I mean, but one of the things which is, as you read, you see that there is also fear in Pete Hegseth that he might be the one next to go.
Oh no, there is the appointment between Pete Hegseth and the underside of a bus is one of life's great inevitabilities. It is just a question of when. Isabel, is there, though, potentially a difference in that it is imaginable, I think at least more imaginable in the context of the United States, that the sunderings between the Secretary of Defense and his generals have occurred when generals have said to him, Mr. Secretary, this is a completely terrible idea and you have simply no idea what you're doing, which I'm going to go ahead and guess is somewhat less likely in the Chinese system?
I think less likely in the Chinese system. It's really in the Chinese system more about structural loyalty to the party, I think, and indeed to the person of Xi Jinping and his consolidation of power. Clearly, there is a situation in Washington which is being massively incompetently handled, and I'm sure that senior generals would have said, cough, cough, excuse me, are you sure? And that's probably it. But the more Hegseth digs himself into a hole, the harder it is to climb out. And you can't continue with this because you just don't have the material. So at some point, they are going to have to start talking, unless Trump's late night musings on eliminating Iran off the map, which is the most terrifying thing, because it does bring to mind the fact that the United States is a massive nuclear power, and that the last time there was a fear that a president would use nuclear weapons, which was the Richard Nixon era, there were adults in the room who made sure that were such an order to be issued, it wouldn't be carried out without going through very senior people and wouldn't be carried out. But
now
it's Hexeth. So, enjoy the weekend, everyone.
On that happy thought, to India, where following the general election of 2024, excitable observers began drafting political obituaries of long-serving Prime Minister Narendra Modi. His Bharatiya Janata Party got its chain pretty briskly yanked. However, writing Modi off has proved a bad bet many times before. It would appear greatly to the vexation of his opponents to be the case again. The result of the recent state election in West Bengal, a part of India hitherto resistant to Modi, was a thumping victory for the BJP and an end to 15 years of state government by the Trinamool Congress under Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee. She will be succeeded by the BJP's Suvendu Adhikari, who takes charge of a state which, and I just always love the numbers where India is concerned, takes charge of a state which, were it a separate country, would be Earth's 17th biggest by population, though it is only the 4th biggest Indian state by population. The mind always ends up boggling, Somnath, when you contemplate these things. But let's look at this mind-boggling result. How big a deal is this in the context of Indian politics? Like, did even Narendra Modi think he was going to win in West Bengal?
He was determined to win. He and the Home Minister put everything they had, the cadre system, money, the election commission, the entire centre's power came down on Bengal. Mamata Banerjee, who lost, was a fighter. She fought till the end, but it was overwhelming. And especially the SIR, the revision of voter rolls, which 9 million voters were delisted. And this was carried out in a matter of months. Everyone had to go and prove their. And this was especially focused on Muslim areas, minority areas where the BJP were particularly weak. And strangely, in those provinces, the numbers of people taken out were kind of in proportion to the numbers BJP won by. And the numbers are now out, so it's not even, I'm not kind of calculating anymore. This is what the facts are. So what does it say? Bengal was one of the last bastions. The left in Kerala have fallen in other ways. The kind of anti-minority hard right has kind of taken over India and institutions, and a couple of states which were flailing around, even they have now fallen. So it's a dark day for democracy. I'm saddened, really. I just wrote to my mother, if you kind of manage this, otherwise I'm never coming back. And she said, I'm still here, do come. But no, though the left-wing press tried to kind of say that there was hope, it seemed last 2-3 months that you couldn't fight the BJP monetarily, and the way they had co-opted the institutions, there was no way a free and fair election could have taken place. So India is the largest democracy in the world. It's also it's the biggest malfunctioning democracy in the world.
Isabel, there was, as I was suggesting, a bit of chat a couple of years ago to the effect that Modi was now a diminished figure on the way out, twilight of career, etc. Does this suggest that he is perhaps less diminished than many may have preferred?
Well, I think it certainly does. I mean, it's a Lazarus-like political revival. But I'm also struck that, that India is obviously very much a world unto itself, but there are trends in common with elsewhere. This hardline kind of anti-minority kind of approach, which we see everywhere from the United States to Europe, and the kind of underperformance of traditional oppositions. The Congress Party has been very, very feeble for quite some time. Again, sort of knocked off its perch and taking a long time to reconstitute itself and become a credible opposition, very much as the Democrats have. So there is a kind of deeper trend in politics from which India doesn't seem to be entirely immune.
But before this, at least, Somnath, and I'm just thinking of my own very limited experience of this part of India, but it was my sense from spending some time in West Bengal, admittedly a long time ago, that it's that part of India, much like, I don't know, Texas in the United States, that sees itself as somewhat apart and somewhat distinctive, with a sort of perhaps slightly richer regional character than less fortunate citizens of other states. How different has it been politically?
Very different. The idea that a kind of Hindi belt, that's how we look at them, the Hindi belt party can win in Bengal was unthinkable, even 15 years back. Bengal till then had been under a left rule for about 37 years. Mm-hmm. And then Banerjee was, though she was centre-right, she still was the Calcutta's girl. Mm-hmm. So the fact that Amit Shah and Modi could come in, and to be fair to them, urban voters have voted in very large numbers for the BJP, right? So in Calcutta especially. So, and voter lists were not that consequential there. So there is a definite shift, and anti-incumbency maybe, yes, but also there's a definite shift in voter mood, and Bengal is now following the rest of India. Sadly.
Well, finally on today's show, I notice here in the script that producer Chris Chermak has queued up another one of his musical introductory interludes. Notorious B.I.G. for reasons which will shortly become transparent. We go to South Korea, the government of which appears to be operating on a general philosophy of sure, why not? Little else appears to explain a decision to permit the issue of credit cards to children aged 12 and up. Although given that parental consent will be required, it would be genuinely surprising if the number of Korean teenagers who actually end up with a credit card is any higher than zero. The idea is to enlarge financial literacy among the young, though hat off to the Korea Times sub-editor who composed the splendidly deadpan headline, "Parents Sceptical About Government Decision to Allow Credit Cards for Minors." See also, porcelain shop proprietors wary of proposals to admit wild bulls. Isabel, what could possibly go wrong?
I can't think what the problem is here. Of course, give a 12-year-old a credit card. Why not? What sort of financial literacy are we looking at here? It may be the lesson that possibly, if you don't earn it, you don't get it.
Yeah, possibly a lot of lessons learnt the hard way, I suspect. Somnath, would you be reassured by the fact that there will be limits depending on parental tolerance of 100,000 to 500,000 won per month? That's about 50 quid to 250 quid.
Yeah, I would be. I'll tell you why. Because I can see the skepticism. I have a 12-year-old.
So you're an ideal test case.
But we do give him, when he travels alone, nowadays he goes for his cricket tournaments to Dubai and other travels. So we have to give him a card. And he has learned to use it rationally.
Okay.
And the point being also that we can assign him particular amounts for particular things he can call. So there is a bit of, I know this is capitalism has won again, and I understand that.
And presumably you get alerts on your phone. You can see
every time.
You can see if he's gone to Dubai and bought a Bugatti.
I think my card would never allow anything like that.
Your credit limit would be.
So I can see why it would be convenient, safer at times, because kids are not carrying cash; they're being sent. So, and I have found, at least, and I don't say this for everyone, but my son has been quite prudent at knowing that if I do this once, it's killing the golden goose. So he's managed to stay within limits.
Okay, well that's. But that does bring us to the serious point here, Isabel, which is there a case on the financial literacy front, or at least is there a case that is something that should be better taught much, much earlier than it is? Because this is a complaint I have heard among people of my own cohort and indeed of subsequent generations, that you sort of spend all this time at school and then get kicked out into the world where all of this stuff suddenly becomes incredibly important and no one's really spent so much as 10 minutes telling you how any of it works.
Well, there are ways ways to encourage your children to be responsible spenders. And one is that, there are cards where you put a prepaid amount and you say there's nothing, you can't go beyond that. And at least you know what you're in for. The problem with credit cards is that, you don't, even without a Bugatti, you could be in for a lot more than you intend. And actually, I think that, really, if you want people to manage money, you want them to understand priorities, and if you spend on this, you can't spend on that. And that's basic financial literacy, which you can get with much less risk.
But these are credit cards with limits. That's what
they have
right?
limits, but they're credit cards rather than prepaid
Yes,
cards.
that's fair.
But is that, and again, tying this to your own experience, Somnath, is that distinction important? Because there is still a thing, even with a limit on credit cards, I do think people think about them slightly differently. Because
it's free money.
Yeah. You don't see it exit your account immediately. It's like you've got 4 whole weeks.
Well, to be fair, my son wouldn't understand the difference between a debit card and a credit card. He knows that if I tap it, it works or it doesn't work. So the thing is with me. So, and if I have set a limit, I know my limits. So I know I'm being the contrarian here, but I somehow feel that so for example, he goes off to Leicester for a 2-week tournament. We had given him £100 in cash, and somebody nicked it. One of said he came back crying. Now we give him a card, it doesn't get nicked. So, because he has a PIN code. And so there's a safety net in that, I feel, which has worked for him. And I know I'm being very particular, but so I knew I would get into trouble with you two on this one. So, but I still say that I can understand the logic. I don't know if the government had to pass this law. Was that a necessity, or parents could choose to, depending on their toddlers, say yes or no? So
you're advocating giving toddlers credit cards.
I think of my 12-year-old as a toddler.
Isabel, just finally, can you imagine what the 12-year-old yourself would have done if someone had just said, here's a credit card?
Whoopee!
Exactly the attitude I suspect they're seeking to discourage. Isabel Hilton and Somnath Batabyal, thanks for joining us. Finally, on today's show, last week, Royal Designers for Industry launched a new event series, the Entanglement Sessions, a programme of talks bringing together designers from across disciplines to rethink how their work can respond to the climate crisis. One of the speakers was Joe Da Silva, a structural engineer and global director of sustainable development at Arup. Monocle's Hassan Anderson caught up with her after her talk, which was focused on the idea of regenerative design. Hassan began by asking what sets that approach apart from more familiar ideas of sustainability.
So sustainability has been really important, but it's basically based on the principle of do less harm. We've spent decades trying to reduce carbon, to reduce waste, to reduce pollution. Meanwhile, the levels of reduction we've achieved have not kept pace with the damage we've been doing to the planet in terms of climate change, in terms of nature loss. So sustainability hasn't really worked, and we have to find a different way. And regenerative design is recognizing that not only do we have to create an equilibrium between human needs and the carrying capacity of the planet, but we also need to heal the damage that's been done to date. Now, our planet's sick. We've transgressed most of the sort of health factors for the planet, whether it's in terms of land use or nitrates, phosphates, ocean well-being, fresh water. And we need to recognize that human life on this planet depends on the health of nature. And so start designing places, starting with nature, and recognizing that we need to think in systems, not in terms of individual assets.
I wanted to come on to systemic design. What will that look like in practical terms, rather than designing things, designing systems?
So I think it's very easy to say that we're going to design to a brief that we've been given. But I think as designers we have to look beyond the boundary of that brief to understand the context in which whatever we're designing operates, and to recognize that actually everything is a system and there are flows in and out of that system. Those could be flows of material, it could be flows of water, it could be flows of information, it could be flows of people. But actually nothing exists in isolation. Everything is connected to everything else. And it's just actually thinking in that different way that enables us to design in a different way. A big chunk of my career has been spent working either in post-disaster situations or in emerging economies with people who are poor, who are vulnerable, who don't have agency. And yet they have ideas. They know what they need. And they don't want people to design things for them that are irrelevant. You know, if you're designing a kindergarten and you actually start engaging with children, you start seeing the world through the eyes of a 6-year-old. That can change the way you see everything. Similarly with old people, with young people, with marginalized groups. So we as designers aren't prima donnas. You know, we don't necessarily need to be the creators. We can simply be the enablers or perhaps the integrators of other people's ideas.
There's a kind of forgotten relationship we've had with nature that at one point perhaps was much better than it is today. Do you think that there is a sense in which there was a sweet spot in history where civilization and nature was much more in harmony? And are we destined, therefore, to kind of design our way back to a past that was once good?
What people forget is that when I was born, which was in the 1960s, there were less than half as many people on the planet. And we were in balance with the capacity of the planet to provide for us. Now we use more than 1.7 planets a year. We're just out of balance. But that's happened in my lifetime. And therefore I believe that in the next 50 years that we can actually redress that balance and return to where we were. That's why I talk about losing our way. It's not that we're on a trajectory that is going to reach disaster. It's actually recognizing that we've just taken a few wrong turns and we need to get back to the connections that we had previously.
I just wonder, when it comes to media reporting on the climate crisis, it can feel very hopeless. But you describe yourself as a possibilist rather than an optimist. What gives you hope when it comes to the future in terms of what can change, and how do you think the media should reflect that?
I describe myself as a possibilist, which is someone who imagines a better future and then works really hard to get there. All the time, people are creating amazing solutions to the challenges we face. Yes, so an example of something that's given me real hope is the way in which sponge cities have taken off. This was a concept developed in China by a professor there who was an architect and urban designer. And he said it's ridiculous to put rivers in cities in concrete culverts. They're like straitjackets. And instead, he said, we need to make friends with water. We need to nurture wetlands and open spaces that absorb water, slow down water. And that's how we're going to reduce flood risk. That's been adopted as a national standard in China. It's been adopted globally by firms like us as the way of doing things. These are the things that need to be amplified. In the same way, solar energy and wind energy is cheaper now than any fossil fuels. It's ridiculous to worry about the oil and gas industry drying up because of the situation in the Middle East. What we need to be doing is using this opportunity to recognise that future energy security comes from investing in renewables and local energy sources at home.
That was Joe De Silva of Arup speaking with Monocle's Hassan Anderson. And that is all for this edition of The Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Isabel, Hilton and Somnath Batabyal. Today's show was produced by Chris Chermack. Our sound engineer was Elliot Greenfield with editing assistance from Christy O'Grady. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.